looking for a distributor or a true partnership? We know that you have extensive experience and expertise with business applications on-prem systems. But when you start to navigate on the cloud, it can be a little bit challenging. And this is where SureWeb team can help you. I work with an amazing team. We are all Dynamics 365 certified, and we would like to help you build a strong cloud practice. From setting up your business to the cloud to understanding how to leverage Microsoft financial incentives or reach certain competencies, we can help you every step of the way. Imagine being able to leverage this team from sales to marketing to support to pre-sales. We are there behind you. We are part of your team.
Please welcome our final speaker of the day, Mary Thompson, a Dynamics Angels guru. Today, she will be presenting her session, Postman and APIs, made easy for functional and tech BC consultants. Please stick around after Mary's session for a live Q&A.
Hello, and welcome to Dynamics Con. Super excited to have you here today and joining my session. Don't forget that we'll all be active in the chat, so can't wait to answer any questions you may have in there. Today, my presentation is on D365 Business Central Postman and APIs made easy. And the goal is really to empower functional consultants and understand how to work between Business Central and APIs. A little bit about me before we get started. I'm Mary Thompson. I work for Bamboo Cloud. I'm a business application MVP, and I'm actually an accountant turned to citizen developer / functional consultant. And I like to point that out to show you that you don't have to come from some long-standing tech background to be successful and understand how to work with maybe some more complicated things such as APIs. All right, I'm really excited about today's agenda as well. We're going to start off by taking a look at what you need to do for the setup work inside of Business Central. Then we're going to take a look at some different components in Postman, including authentication, request headers, methods, and body. I'm also going to take a look at how to use API templates. It corresponds between Business Central and Postman. And after we've talked through everything, then I'm actually going to show you what I'm talking about and kind of give you some real life examples as well. The first thing we're going to take a look at is what you need to do to get set up inside of Business Central. One of the most important things is that you actually have to be a user in O365 and you have to have a full business license. So sometimes as functional consultants, we have a delegated admin access and we wonder why maybe we go through these steps and it doesn't work. It's because you don't have a full license. So if you have a demo environment that you work with, usually you'll see me use Michael Fletcher or one of those business users that have a full license. Super important to note in here. You also need to go into the admin center to make sure that you enable the APIs. And then we're going to use the web service key right now. But I also want to take a note, super popular right now is the fact that the web service key will be deprecated in April 2022. And then we will be switching to an OAuth 2 authentication. But for our purposes today, we're going to stick with the current method of web service key. The next thing that we're going to look at is the API URL structure. The first part of this URL, everything from HTTPS to this V2, this is going to be the same for every single solitary instance. Some documentation you may see notes a V1, and that's okay. Most of those work, but the new upgraded one that contains more metadata is in V2. This tenant ID and this environment, this is what's going to be specific for your environments, for your particular URL, right? So that you can read to the company that you're looking at. And as you can see here, this screenshot is from your admin center, your Business Central admin center. And all you're going to do is, it has the URL down here. And then after this slash, you're going to have this like funky, alpha text, long name here. This is going to be, well, you can either use your domain name. So maybe if mine said, bambooocloud.com, businesscentral.dynamics.bambooocloud.com, then I could use that. Or you can use this, which is called your tenant ID. And then you're going to point it to your environment, right? Because sometimes you maybe want to doing some work in your sandbox. So you want to make sure that you point it to your sandbox environment. And then whenever you get ready to move it into production, then you're going to move it into production. So that's just the easy template of how this works and where it comes from. Now that we've taken a look at what we need to do to get set up in Business Central, we're going to move on over to what I'm going to call Postman 101. First thing is you kind of have to get the authentication set up. And that means, do I have access inside Business Central? If you don't bring over that web service key that we took a look at on, the username and where to get that from, then it's not going to work with inside Postman here. So what it's going to be is it's going to be your username, and then there is a web service key that I'll show you my example as well. And all you're going to get that from is your user. So that's the first step, is getting your authentication set up, carrying that over from Business Central into Postman. One thing that I want to make note of before we continue on here is that many of my screenshots will also come from Microsoft Docs, where I'm looking at this one right here, this Welcome to API v2. And I'm going to reference the customer API or endpoint in most situations. And that way, whenever we go into Postman, it'll make it a little bit more easy for you to understand where I'm getting the documentation from and how powerful and useful that is for you. Because that's what I did for so much of my stuff. I mean, I don't know how to write a JSON file or anything like that, but the documentation that Microsoft provides is super great and gives you everything that you need to know to carry that into Postman. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is headers, or more formally called as HTTP request headers. And basically, it's just an easy way to pass metadata from Postman into Business Central. On the left-hand side here of my screen, you will see that this is what we have in Postman. And there's different content types, different links. But as I've been referencing to the documentation from docs.microsoft, we see the details here. It's literally telling me what type of request headers that I need in Postman. So if you're not sure, go to your documentation, look at it here, and then copy it into here. After headers, then we go into request methods. So there's 4 different basic request methods. Your first one is get, or in my scenario, I've got get customer. So that gives you an array of all the different customers inside of the system. The next most popular one is going to be post. That's going to be creating something inside of Business Central from API. You're going to post or push the information in there. The next one that we'll take a look at is patch. So patch is just simply updating. So let's say I created a customer, but then I needed to update something, or maybe we're talking about their credit limit, right? And then you want to take their credit limit from another system and update it into Business Central, then you would use patch. Patch is to update. And then finally, there's delete. And as you can guess, it deletes the information that you put inside of Business Central via API. There's a couple other things that I guess I wanted to mention as well, and we'll dive into that too. But when you're looking at get and delete, they actually don't require a request body, which that'll mean more to you in a little bit, but I just want you to hold on to that little nugget for right now. So now we are talking about the request body properties. What's a property? Those are all the fields that you're used to using inside Business Central, right? So let's talk about the customer card. Inside the customer card, you're going to have things like your number, the name, what type of customer it is, the address, your city, your state. Ironically, all the different fields, right, that we see here on my Microsoft documentation listing the properties. But then we see this type here that says, all these different things. GUID, string, nav type. What does that mean, right? If you're looking at this documentation, you're like, okay, I followed you till we got here, but now I have no idea. Don't worry. It's very easy, actually. So I hear that the correct way to say this is GUID. I don't know, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but really what it stands for is it's a global unit identifier. So inside of Business Central, while we see what I'm going to call some external names or some names that we see up front, there's also some numbers that are very specific to that customer, that company, that are in the background. And so sometimes there's maybe more than one primary key for a field, and this GUID or this global unit identifier, it's just an easier way to not have to deal with multiple primary keys. I'll show you an example of that in a little bit, but just know that when this GUID, when it says type GUID, you're going to have to pull that information kind of from a get function. Again, I'll show you, just giving you the background. String is just text. Very simply put, it is simply text. On some of them here down here, right? So we see tax liable, it's Boolean. And if you're looking at the card, tax liable may make more sense to you. You either have the checkbox or you have it's either checkbox or on or toggle on or off, right? So basically, all that means is Boolean is yes or no, okay? Then the next one that we're going to take a look at is nav.contact type, right? We see that in a few different places here. So again, thinking about the customer card, you have two options. You have company or person. So what nav.contact type means, you'll see that in a couple different areas, and really it's just saying the system has some predefined options, and you have to choose which one is going to be. So that's what it's looking for in that type of scenario. All right, so what does this all mean? All of your properties and your values go into what's called a request body JSON. And when I mentioned some of the documentation before, like I don't know how to write a JSON object, this is it. I wouldn't know necessarily how to do this or everything that goes into it, but you just hit this magic copy button and then you can actually fill this in. And so I went through the previous screen to explain to you what all of this is, right? What does it mean when it wants, a contact type or a string or a GUID? Well, now you know. This is the information that you're going to be filling in. Fun little facts too. So these are called curly brackets, and you can see that these curly brackets are going to be at the beginning and the end of the JSON file. And that means it's for an object, but sometimes you'll see, like when we do a get function, instead of having curly brackets, our response is actually going to be like a regular bracket, right? No curlies, just regular bracket. And so regular brackets are for an array, which is just a fancy way of saying a list. So that kind of makes sense. When I get something, I'm getting a whole list of customers, or it's an array, so it has those brackets instead of the curly brackets. But in this scenario, we're just putting in all the information for one customer or one object. Another little thing to point out in this JSON, as you can see here, between each different property or value type here, right? We see ID, we see number, you see a little comma here at the end, right? So that's separating it, identifying that there's going to be, another property that's going to follow it. Until we get down here to the last one where it says, modification date, and then we see that there's not another comma, and that means because there's no other properties that we're going to have here. So just be really careful whenever you're kind of copying and pasting things over. Let's say you don't even have to use this whole thing. Maybe I only care about half of these, and so I copy and I paste and I delete, but I don't delete that comma, you're going to get some funky errors. So just some fun tips to watch out for. API templates. I like to think of API templates as like a relationship, another relationship between Business Central and Postman. So especially on like a customer card, right? There's things like customer posting groups that if you were to look on the documentation, that you don't see that as one of the properties that are available to push through. And to me, that didn't really make a lot of sense at first, right? Like you have to have a customer posting group. Like the posting groups are the bread and butter of Business Central. So it seemed really odd to me that you wouldn't be able to pass that through. And then I found out about API templates. So what that is it's being able to set up a customer template and then pointing and telling Business Central, hey, I want you then to take this customer template and to point it to a specific page inside of this template so that every time a new customer is added, there's going to be these additional fields that are added in there. So instead of having to pass maybe some common information through each time, or things like financial posting groups, you can use these API templates. I'll show you an example with that as well, so it will make a little bit more sense. Now it's time to put everything that I've just discussed into action. We're going to take a look at how to get the web service key from Business Central, how to pass that into Postman, and then we're going to show you the headers. We're going to look at the request, different gets, push, pulls, deletes, and how to format that body. And we're going to actually push some data from API through to Business Central. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so now that we're in Business Central, we're going to take a look at a few things that I mentioned that need to be set up ahead of time. The first thing that we're going to take a look at is grabbing that web service key. So I'm going to go into my global search and I'll type in users. And like I mentioned, I'm going to use this Michael Fletcher because I need to have a D365 Business Central Essential. I need to have a full license here. When I take a look at my user, Michael Fletcher here, I see that I have a D365 Business Central full license. As I mentioned before, this is super important. I already have this web service key set up in this scenario, so I'm not going to reset it or it's going to mess up some of my examples, but basically all you do is you click in here, and if mine says, do you want to continue, and I don't, because as you can see, it's not going to be valid after I do that, so I'm just going to leave it for now. But what your screen would come up and say, do you want to create a new web service key? And I would say yes. And then it would give me an option if I want it to expire. I don't like them to expire, so I hit no. And then from there, after you do that, it pops into here. So that's where all of this came from. And then if you click in here, you can then copy this. Basically, you'll just copy this and put it, I usually put it in OneNote or something to that extent, but this is going to be your super long password that we're going to use inside of Postman. Additionally, we're going to need this username. So you see that mine is Michael Fletcher, all caps, no spaces. And so this username and password is what I'm going to use inside of Postman. Additionally, I told you that I would tell you about that API URL structure. So the way that you get there very easily is you're going to come and hit the gear, and if I go to my admin center, then I will see a list of my URLs in this situation. So if you recall, this is the same screenshot that we looked at inside of the PowerPoint presentation, and as I showed you, everything to the left of this little bracket here is not what I need. It's all the alpha numbers, right? And then we see the / in production. So you'll need that to set up your API structure as well. All right, now we're going to take a look at Postman. You can either easily download Postman. There's a desktop version, and there's also a web URL version as well. I'm sure that there's some very specific differences, but to be honest with you, I don't know all of them. I just think it's easier to do it in the desktop version. One thing I want to kind of call out too is I try to be somewhat of an organized person to a certain extent. And as you can see here, there's some other work actually that I've been working on and done. And I'm the type of person, I'm going to have like 30,000 tabs on my web browser open, and it's going to drive people crazy. And I found that oftentimes that's what I had here as well. But then I couldn't figure out which one I needed to be on. So what you can do is you can actually create these collections in this scenario, and I'll call this, demo just for now. And so then you see that I've got this demo, and then what I can do is I can come in here and I can hit a new request, and then it's even going to ask me what section that I want to put it in. So it's a great way, and then you'll see, and then so my request name, maybe I'll call this get customer. And so now I have this specific tab, and we see it over here as well. So it's just a great way to help keep yourself organized. I'm going to switch to my Dynamics column that I have set up as well. And again, feel free, I know in some of these areas that there may be a lot of questions. Don't forget that the chat is open, and just to be asking, pop all your questions in there, and either myself or somebody that's way smarter than me that's also in the chat can also help answer those questions as well. First things is that we're going to take a look at the authorization. So what we're going to look at today is this basic authorization. And as you can see, my Michael Fletcher automatically pops up, which is super helpful because I don't want to have to keep going back to wherever I copied and pasted it the first time and figuring out this really long, password here. So it will save it for you. But what you do here, this is the username and password that we just pulled from Business Central here, right? So Michael Fletcher, web service key, here, same thing. Michael Fletcher, web service key, and if I show my password here, you can see that it was the same. So that's all we're talking about there. I did mention that there's going to be the OAuth verification or password check, we'll call it for easy layman's terms, that's going to change. And then in that scenario, you would change it from basic auth to OAuth 2. And one thing that's very important, I guess, that I also didn't mention already yet is my entire presentation is focusing on SaaS-based API calls and methods only. If you're using like a Docker container or something to that extent, then it's a little bit different. And this may help you with that. It'll help you on some things, but like basically your API requests will be a little bit different. So just things to take note of there. Okay, so next I'm going to take a look at my headers. Actually, let me do this. So when I take a look at my API here, I see that it's the same structure that I've been looking at previously. I've got api.businesscentral.dynamics.com. I've got my V2, and then I've got the tenant ID and production environment that I wanted to look at before. So for a second here, I'm actually just going to take everything over here, and I'm going to copy this, and I will create a new request over here. Again, so I'm going to go here to my authentication. I'm going to go to basic auth. I see that this automatically populates. Now, you'll see that I've got my request of get. So if I hit send, what this is going to do is this is the, the API structure, the API URL, and what it's going and doing is it's getting all of the endpoints that are available inside of this environment, everything that I can take a look at. So as we can see here, notice I didn't have to do a body, right? I said for gets because we're just pulling an array of information, and as you can see here, right, here's the brackets that I mentioned before, because then this is all of the list of different things. So what this is saying, right, we see companies, we see subscriptions, we see items, unit of measure. These are all the different endpoints that you could possibly pull inside of Business Central into here. So what I'm going to do, first we're going to take a look at companies, because if I scroll back to my documentation, as I mentioned in my presentation, that I look at this documentation a lot. So right now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop this this URL into the chat window as well. And so what I see is, like I promised, I'm going to focus on my customer. So when I take a look quickly here at this customer, right, these are all the screenshots that I showed you earlier. These are the methods. These are all the things that you can do with the customer endpoint, and just some different navigation areas, and then the properties. These are all the properties that I talked about as well. So when I want to get a customer, right, it tells me my URL request that I want to get, and then it tells me this is the prefix, right, this is the API that we've been taking a look at, and then we need the companies, but we haven't talked about companies, right? So this is a company ID. This is one of those GUIDs that I was talking about before. So let me show you how to get that. I just wanted to kind of focus you where we were going and why I was going down this path with you. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm actually going to say, hey, give me all my companies, right? And I know that this is an endpoint that I can do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put this companies at the end of this URL here. So just a quick copy and paste. And so now you can see that it's going to actually give me a list of all my companies in the system here. But what I really like is that maybe I'm looking for a specific one. Instead of filtering through all the way down here, I'm just going to type in what I need. So here I see there's Cronus. Here's the one I want. I want Cronus USA. So this is the ID that the documentation is referencing here. So let me show you. It says companies, this is the ID, then that's what I'm trying to get at, right? So I'm going to take this ID here, and I'm simply going to copy it between the quotations, and then in parentheses, I'm going to type this here. And then what I'm going to do with this, I'm going to copy all of this. I'm going to create a new tab, and I'm going to create a new tab because I'm actually changing what I'm doing here. So now I'm going to I'll show you. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do my customers and show you that now I can get all of my customers that are inside of Business Central in this environment in this specific company. And we see 200 means that everything worked. And so now when I look down here, I see display name. This is case 100, a datum, right? We're going to see all of our different customers in here. So that's how you can use the get function to get those IDs and kind of build your URL as you go. So now I'm actually going to copy and paste all of this over because we're going to take a look at a different request. We're going to call this one post. And that means now I'm going to actually put a customer into Business Central using this functionality. So first thing is we looked at our headers, and the one that I'm missing here, if I look at my documentation, is I'm going to look at create customer now, right? So it's going to tell me post, I need my company's ID, which is why I grabbed that before, and customers. Here's an important part, right? So I need my authorization, we're good there, but I need to add a certain header. It's called content type and application. So I'm going to hit content type, see down here, content type, and then I'm going to hit application Json here. I didn't grab the right one. Technical difficulties. Great. So I'm going to hit application JSON because that's all my documentation tells me to do. So I've looked at my, I haven't looked at my authorization. See, this is where I always kind of go back over to myself. So I've got my authorization, I've got my headers, and now we're ready to look at body, which is something different than we haven't looked at yet. So you see that right now this is on none. This is very important. You need to change it to raw and then change it to JSON. Sometimes it may be on text and that's not going to work. We needed to have it on JSON. Then I'm going to go back here to my documentation. And here's where I said some of these request bodies come from. All I'm going to do is I could hit copy and it'll copy everything here. But I'm just going to, let's see here, I'll just take it from here up for right now. So I'm going to go take this back into Postman. I'm just going to paste this into here. One thing that's important, this is this ID section right here. This ID is, and I also need to put a curly bracket up here, and then I'll put this down here, take that out, and put another curly bracket, right? Because we have to start and end with curly brackets. But this ID, we need to point it to the company ID. So that was part of the reason why we went and did all of that get before, right? Because I want to make sure that I'm putting this customer into the right company. So here I'll take my company and copy this, and then I'm just going to put this inside of the brackets. And then I'm going to change this just so that we have some changes in it, and we can go in Business Central and see. And I'm going to change this customer name to World Max, and we'll take this to 555 455. Okay. And great. So now I'm going to go, one thing is if you're not really sure if you have all of the formatting exactly right, then you can also hit this beautify and it'll kind of tighten it up the way that it's supposed to. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit send. And we see we have a 201 status, which means that it created. Great. What I'm going to do is just jump back into Business Central real quick, and then I'll show you that we just created this customer, just to prove that I'm not lying. And as we can see here, right, this is the customer that we just created. So very easily, all I did was copy and paste a bunch of information from documents into API, and like that, I was able to create a customer inside of Business Central. We've taken a look at adding a customer and using get and post, and I'm going to take you through one more area, what's just going to called update, just to show you that it works just a teeny tiny bit different in this scenario. So what I'm going to do here is actually I can, again, a lot of times I'm going to be copying most of this information over. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to create a new, change this to patch. Got to change my authentication, basic, right? Get that one to pop back up. And then we're going to add two different headers here in this situation. So one of them is going to be content type, and it's going to be application JSON. And then if I reference my documents once again, right? So I want to just show you exactly how you can use this to help yourself. So it says request header that we need the authorization, that's cool, content type, application JSON. But this one we need to add if match, and then it says it needs an E tag. Let me show you what we're doing there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go if match. And what this is saying is that it needs, if it matches this specific E tag, then and then if there is a change, then we need to update the information. So what I'm doing is I'm just going back one section, right? So we posted this customer, and this down here this is called the body, and this is giving us a bunch of information about it. And lo and behold, up here we see odata.etag. So this is actually what I need in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this, and what I'm looking at is I don't need the outside quotation. So I'm going to copy this. And then in this if match, I'm going to do this. And for some reason, it does like these weird back brackets, but you don't need those weird back brackets. You just need it to be just like this, right? So W / then the quotes around it. Then in my body, let me come back here. All you have to put in the body in this scenario is what you actually want to change. So let's say I'm going to change my address line. And so you see here, I've got to change this to raw and then JSON, and then I'm going to put my curly bracket, and I'm going to hit that, and I don't need that, and change this to, let's say, like 500 Market Street. Okay, and then if I hit beautify, again, you see how it separated it the way that it needs to be. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit send. So very quickly, we've taken a look at how to get not only customers, but also take an array of all of the endpoints that are inside of Business Central that we can pass back and forth between Business Central and Postman. And then we also use some of those IDs to continue building on our URL, API URL, and also looked at posting. So you would kind of just carry out this same functionality in a patch and delete method by just simply changing your post section to either it to be patch, or maybe it would be delete. And I won't go through the full example, but for the patch, all you would do is you change your header, and based off the documentation, again, just focus on what your documentation says. Use the if match. It's going to ask you for an e tag, and that's our e tag right there. So that's how you can easily pass information into Business Central using Postman via APIs. Well, that's a wrap for me. Thanks so much for joining my session today. I would love to connect with you. You can find me on Twitter at mm090511. Also, if you'd like some easy intro videos to Business Central, you can find me on YouTube. I'd love any feedback you have as well on today's session. You can go ahead and just scan the QR code up at the top right of my screen. I want to thank all of our sponsors and DynamicsCon for putting on another amazing event that I love being a part of. And also, I want to give a really special thanks to some amazing community members, Stefan Moran, AJ Kaufman, and Nick Aris, who have helped me so much in my API learning adventure. Now, just because we're done here, don't forget, we'll be live in just a few seconds, and I can't wait to answer more of your questions. Thanks.
Hello, Mary.
Hey,
Excellent
Steve, how are you?
presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to also start off by saying happy birthday. I'm sure you haven't heard that enough today, but while
Thank
you
you
have
very
the
much.
audience and stage, might as well say it.
Very cool. Well, thank you for that excellent presentation.
Yeah.
I also love Postman. I care about Business Central API. So I was thrilled when I saw your session to be voted on, your presentation proposal for DynamicsCon, and I'm very happy it was selected. I think we need to share this with the world.
Yeah, very excited it got selected as well. And, you know, it was kind of funny. It was just before we were getting ready to do more of the, you know, the DynamicsCon selections, right? I had just recently upskilled and learned about, you know, the Postman and the API. So I was super excited. And I think we were talking about that. And I was like, I remember putting it on Twitter and I'm like, nope, this one's mine. I tried to call dibs on it.
Very good. Well, I totally agree. It is an essential, I think it's an essential piece of knowledge for anyone who's going to try and work with Business Central via API or wants to retrieve data from an external source. I think it's a great thing to know. And as you point out in your session, it's not just a development resource, right? And so tell us about like your experience of learning Postman.
Yeah, so I work in my job day to day. I work from a partner level all the way down to an implementation level, right? And so the way that it had gotten started is I had a customer or partner that I was working with, and they told their customer that we were going to integrate to this industry specific manufacturing system. And then it was told to me that that's what we were going to do. And actually, our developer was completely slammed, and he didn't have the capacity to be able to kind of walk the developer for this customer for this manufacturing system. He didn't have the time to walk them through it. So he sent me this document. I started kind of looking around. AJ had actually helped with some of it, because I was like, how do we do batch calls is basically a scenario, right, where we're not just doing like one line by line. And so AJ was gracious enough to jump on a call and walk us through how we did that. And I was like, I want to know more. So then my friend Stefan, he worked with me as well to really understand all of it. So now I find it incredibly useful. Like I wasn't the developer in that, but I was able to help walk the developer through. And I also handle a lot of sales calls as well, so I kind of handle a whole bunch of different areas. So whenever I hear a client and they're telling me, oh, but I'd like to integrate Business Central with this part of my system, or I'd like to just use it for this, it's very easy for me to gauge the effort level that's going to be, taken in there. This will work or this won't work. You only need one API maybe, or you're going to need, customers, vendors, items, and GL Ledger, right? That's the most common one that I see. Or sales headers and sales invoices as well. So, just helping and understanding the project. And I think I'm a very hands-on person. So the more that I know about a subject, the easier it is even for me to be good at implementation and be a good consultant. So
absolutely.
And all over the place.
The BC APIs, I know that Tanya Henderson learned them a few years ago, not for integrations at all, but for reporting. And so both the OData web services and BC APIs, and she now uses Postman fluently in order to retrieve data, check data for reporting purposes. So it has that great benefit. She's not a developer either, but she's very capable with Postman and APIs now. Excellent.
I love that use case scenario.
Very cool. Well, we have a few questions. Were there any that you wanted to cover first?
I'm open.
Okay.
You just tell me where we should go.
Okay. So during your presentation, you showed how to authenticate using the BC User Web API key.
Yeah.
And tell us, I know there's a little bit of back conversation there with the Web API key, basic authentication versus OAuth 2. Anything you'd like to share on news on that?
Yeah, so I went ahead and just dropped a link into the chat, and it really walks you through how to work with APIs in the OAuth 2 authentication. And really the backstory behind that is it was going to deprecate April of this year, but with everything going on, Microsoft went ahead and extended that to April of 2022, which means that at that point, you're no longer going to be able to actually use that web service key that I was showing just now. They're going to run everything through Azure Active Directory, which is your OAuth 2 to authenticate. I have not gone through and set that up yet. Some of the previous things I was looking at, I thought that you needed to do Visual Studio, but these notes actually look quite easy to go and do. So I may end up giving that a shot again, and we'll give AJ another plug here. Pretty sure that one of his most recent or one of his upcoming sessions or courses that he's going to give actually walks through that OAuth 2 and creating some custom APIs as well. So I keep wondering if I have the skill set to be able to take one of his classes. So maybe one of these days I'll pull the plug and do it. But that's the background behind that, right? The basic authentication, it will get you for about the next year, and then you're going to have to switch over. So I have some customers right now that are actually starting. Earlier today, I had somebody ask me, this isn't working. What do I need to do? So I sent them this, dialogue, but I also saw that their API was incorrect. So that may have been why it wasn't working, but yeah.
Yes, and I did try OAuth 2 probably a year ago. It was a while ago. And whatever instructions I followed, I found it very confusing. And so AJ's course, I believe, is the first full week in April, like April 6th or something like that. And so I will be attending that. I jumped at the opportunity to learn more about OAuth 2 from AJ. So yeah, we will need to move there. So you can use the web API key for the time being, but no, it is absolutely going to change. So do not invest too heavily in that.
Yeah, exactly. So, so exciting things to be coming, right? Like be watching for blogs and videos, and maybe maybe that'll be my next, Dynamics Con session. I'll have successfully completed one of AJ's calls and be able to do that. We'll see, right?
Excellent. So how about, can I import say a full transaction or a full journal into Business Central? So not just a vendor, a customer, an item. Can I actually push a full transaction via the BC API?
Yeah, so I think let me structure this call or this answer a little bit, right? So so one of the integrations that I worked with was we used heavily the general ledger API, right? So we brought over customers and vendors, so we had that transaction, and then we were able to actually also push our vendor purchase invoices and customer invoices in through that general ledger transaction, right? So to me, I consider that a full transaction, right? So what you're going to do with that is you're going to structure that JSON body with whatever it is that you need to push into there, right? So for us, we changed the GL account type. Instead of it's like account type, and you call it vendor, right, instead of GL, and then you keep coming down on that, and then it's balancing account, right? So you're offsetting that to your balancing account of a vendor instead. So again, you need to understand what the requirements are inside of Business Central, and then you just pass that through in the JSON body, and then there's this concept. It's called like a deep insert or like a batch call, where you structure that API a little bit differently. And let's see here. That's actually specifically what AJ worked with me on. That was instead of just and I'm trying to like look through my API right, or my looking at it right now, seeing if I can get it quick enough.
That's okay.
Yeah, but it's like adding like a star batch or something at the end of like the API, and what that allows you to do is add multiple lines, right? Because a lot of times maybe it's an inventory transaction or a sales transaction that you want to push through. So you're actually going to have revenue, you're going to have cost of goods sold and that type of scenario. So you can push all of that through if you use this deep insert batch method. So you're not just having to pass one line down at a time. So not sure if that fully answers the question. That's my assumption on where we're going with that.
Yep. The short answer is definitely possible, but it takes an up a notch. You may want to start with the simple vendors, customers, items, GL accounts, and then you can move up to the deep insert transaction insert level. Excellent.
Exactly. That's what we had to do with a lot of troubleshooting. When we got errors, we just simplified it. So.
Okay. So I have a two-part question. One is, I'm retrieving, let's take your example, actually. I did a video based off of your question. I'm retrieving my vendor information, but I don't see a field value, or I need a field that is not present in the standard BC API.
Yeah.
What is the prescription for that situation?
So I think it could be potentially two different folds or two different scenarios, right? Because I think one of the original questions back when I was working on that, one of the things, like I mentioned in my video, was posting groups, right? Like that didn't make sense to me. So that it's possible that if it's maybe what they would consider like a finance transaction, something that you don't want to have maybe developer or something like that be dictating in the transactions, you may find that field on what I'll call like your API templates, right? So you either make a customer or a vendor template where you're going to default that information in there. So that's one scenario. That's one potential scenario. But I think, like in your video chat, I think it was something to do with the 1099 codes, right? Like there's this localization scenario. So in that situation, what that meant was that that field wasn't exposed. So then you got crafty and fancy and made a custom API, and that's what you have to do, right? Like if it's not in the template and it's just simply a field that's not there, usually due to some type of localization error, or not error, but localization issue, we'll call it, then you're going to have to go ahead and create a custom API so that you can expose that field and then, run through that same scenario. I think somebody Tanya asked about, if you had a custom API, how did that work? How did you connect? My goal for this year is to be able to create custom APIs. Not there yet, but AJ gave us some great indications on how that structure works. And also, I'm kind of diversing a little bit. There's a couple people, that yourself included, that were pointing out that if you're using a Docker, right, then your API structure is going to be a little bit different as well. But other than that, everything kind of works the same, right? It's just plug in. I have people give me, like, I recently was working on a project where there was a custom API, and I'm like, great, give me that URL. I didn't have to worry about the structure. Somebody just gave me the API, right? And then you can still connect to it just the same. So.
Yes, and I, based on your question about vendor 1099 information, that's what had me learn how to create a very simple custom API. You're able to take a copy of Microsoft's API page for, say, vendors. You make a small modification to it in the AL programming language. You publish it, and you get your own custom URL, and it works just like the normal ones. And it was surprisingly easy. So I walked through that in a video as well, thanks to your question. And regarding the localization, I think that's an important point. Based on your question, we actually learned that Microsoft does not consider country by country differences to be supported in their core API. So in the United States, vendors have things called 1099 codes or IRS tax codes. In Belgium, there are different ones. In Norway, there's going to be some other Norway-specific field.
Right.
And based on that Twitter thread, they indicated they did not consider any of those country-specific or region-specific fields to be anything they want to support in the base core BC API.
Yeah.
So that may mean that different people in different countries will have to have a custom API.
Yep. Good point. Good point on that. So definitely check out Steve's video.
Okay. So yes, to Tanya's question, can you do a custom API and how would you connect to it? And you had mentioned that does require a little code currently, and it results in a custom URL, but it is not too difficult to do. And let's see, we have a few other questions here. What are some common errors or challenges and roadblocks you ran into when working with Postman and testing APIs?
Yeah, so I think that the number one roadblock that I ran into was doing a lot of testing. So dimensions. Dimensions are making sure that the fields that you want in Business Central, right? If you're trying to push them in there and you're trying to like pass them through, you have to make sure that it's in Business Central to begin with, right? That was one of the things that we saw the biggest error, and whether it be payment terms, right, on our customers or vendors, that was a huge issue, and then dimensions as well. And it was something even as simple as like there being a space, right? Like, and because it's not the code or it's not the name, right? So maybe you have like sales department. And again, in Business Central, you're going to have the description and you're going to have the code. You need to pull the code in there for that to work, right? And so again, we were looking at very simple APIs whenever we were looking at that. So it's not like we had a background saying, push through new dimensions if they're not already in the system, right? We weren't looking at anything like that yet. So that was one of the biggest things that we saw. And then also spent several hours one time trying to get decimals into the system.
Yes.
Yeah, it was like the worst. And then, like, of course, I should have just asked AJ to begin with. There is a very specific header that
was the wildest thing I've ever seen in all my years of software development. I didn't even know that term or that code existed. I've never seen it before in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like only AJ would know. And again, I'm sorry, I meant to have.
I think it had to do with it was a code designating the floating point number format that was being used, and the decimal format. It
Yeah,
was the craziest thing in the world, and it was a header parameter or something.
exactly. And it was a
Yeah.
very strange header scenario.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have to put it on Twitter. I guess look it on Twitter. I'll end up doing like a screenshot and show you guys exactly what that header was, because it was a string value, right? I think it was the way it was reading it. So it had to say it like it wasn't a string or something to that extent, but basically it allowed it to read it as a decimal. I could get whole dollars through, but not decimals. And I was like trying to get it to see the way that it, passed through, but
you did a great job diagnosing it and figuring out that it was a decimal related issue, and AJ was able to track down the cause. That was, I would not have known how to even begin to solve that. So that was a fantastic find. So excellent. Very cool. Let's see. There are a few others, but they're somewhat technical. Let me just see.
I'll jump in with one.
Okay.
So, somebody was asking, I think, about, licensing, right? Like what type of licensing should we have?
Yes.
Should it be a full license, or should it be like a demo database? First off, so a lot of times, like if you're a partner, you're working with partners, and you're on the consultant side, right? And a lot of times we have delegated admin access to our user's environment. But, there's some complications, or there's some limitations to delegated admin. You cannot use your delegated admin user ID to be able to pull that web service key. It will create one, but then it won't ever let you authenticate. You actually have to have a full user license in order to do that. And also a lot of times, your users are going to end up needing like a specific, especially if they're integrating with something, you're going to want to have a designated license just for that integration. So go ahead, get the full user license. I do work with like the demo database, or, it's Michael Fletcher, right? He's my buddy. Anyone that works with Business Central knows who Michael Fletcher is, right? But it's just like the Cronus, type environment. And it's a full user license, but it's a demo one. But I think it's better to use your customer's actual environment, because otherwise, again, like I was talking about, whether it be dimensions or things like that, right? You're not really comparing apples to apples if you're using a demo base. But a demo is a great place to get started if you're just trying to learn how to work with it. How does this functionality work? Then absolutely start with that side. But I definitely recommend when you get into the testing for your customer to have a full user license.
Excellent point. Yep. Very good.
Yeah.
Well,
we are ready.
We have maybe one more minute, but and everyone who is present, we are going to have the what is it called? The networking hour, I guess.
Yeah, we have
networking hour coming up.
Steve's
so we're
gonna be one. I'll be in one. Steve, which one are you doing?
I'm in Business Central with Tanya Henderson. So
yep. So if you want to continue the Business Central conversation, go hang out with Steve. Kristen is going to have one, and Kristen and Jen are hosting one on WIT, and then Women in Technology. Awesome event. Totally recommend checking that one out. And then I'll be jumping over to the Power Platform Networking Hour. We're going to play Never Have I Ever Power Platform Edition. So that should be really exciting. So John and I will be there as well. So definitely be checking this out. Also, hope everyone enjoys the rest of the show, whether it be today or tomorrow. Make sure that you also check out my friends over at the Sure Web booth. They're having a lot of fun doing great things over there as well. And yeah, I want to just say thank you to all of our sponsors. Steve, thanks again for being an awesome moderator and joining me. Steve and I met last year a couple months ago on the last Dynamics Con. So fun to see the full circle go around.
Yep. Well, fantastic job. Thank you for the presentation.
Thanks. Everyone have a great one, and hopefully we'll see you in a networking hour.